Have you heard about Gestalt Language Processors, and are you wondering if your child or client is a Gestalt Language Processor, if that's even a thing, and if so, if they need a special approach to teaching or a different approach to teaching? Today, I am covering all things Gestalt Language Processing and talking about the 5 things I wish I knew 2 years ago when I first heard the term. So let's get to it. So over the past few years, mostly on Instagram and TikTok, parents and professionals began talking about and posting about Gestalt language processing and a framework called the Natural Language Acquisition, or NLA. And NLA has 6 stages of learning, specifically the way they say Gestalt language processors learn. So again, I heard about this for the first time in 2022 when parents and professionals, and really the world of autism specifically, were inundated with your child is a Gestalt language processor. They need a totally different approach. I began getting emails and comments on my social media. I have lots of social media channels. You can search Mary Barbera on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, everywhere you can find me, I am there. So we started getting a lot of inquiries about Gestalt language processing, mostly because I am a behavior analyst and I've worked with thousands of kids directly, and I've trained millions of people around the world over the past 25 years. And I use a behavioral approach to language, a verbal behavior approach, which is using the principles of applied behavior analysis to teach skills and to increase language, decrease problem behaviors, and work on different skills like picky eating, sleeping, potty training, and more. So this Gestalt language processing, I got a lot of inquiries because I was previously doing podcasts and video blogs on things like delayed echolalia and scripting and stimming, and all of this is somewhat related. So today I am covering the 5 things I wish I knew about Gestalt language processing 2 years ago when I first heard the term. Now, I didn't realize this either, but this is quite controversial, as is a lot of things in the autism world. So these 5 things I wish I knew are from my perspective as a mom of a son who just turned 28, who is, very much began speaking in scripts and chunks, and it was confusing. It is also from my perspective as a behavior analyst. Like I said, I've had hundreds of past clients who would be considered GLPs and learning potentially in a different way. And I also have a background as with a PhD in leadership. So in preparation for this recording of this video, I did review 2 critical reviews of Gestalt language processing and the natural language acquisition paradigm. So back in, like I said, we were getting comments and getting emails about this in 2022. So in January of 2023, I did a podcast interview with Sari Risen, who is both an SLP, a speech and language pathologist, as well as a BCBA, board certified behavior analyst. And I interviewed her on the topic of Gestalt language processing. That interview is right under this interview on my website, and you can get all the information and everything I'm going to talk about today at marybarbera.com/293. You can always, if you're out running or, in the car and you don't have, somewhere to write this information down, you can always search Mary Barbera plus whatever topic later to find the information too. So, as I said, Lucas, my son, as well as the majority of my past clients would have been considered Gestalt language processors, because all it means is they tend to, their first language could be little scripts that they've heard from TV. I use the example a lot in previous blogs and podcasts where my son was really little and he was, say 20 months or 2 years of age, and we would take him to the museum near our home, and there would be signs there that would say, please do not feed the ducks. And Lucas was also hyperlexic, which I've done a lot of work on. I have other blogs and podcasts we can link in the show notes, but he would run from sign to sign. He liked the text. He liked the picture of the duck. And my husband or I would read, please do not feed the ducks. And my husband would add quack, quack. So in the middle of the night, sometimes Lucas would wake up because he also had sleeping problems. And he would say, please do not feed the duck, quack, quack. Instead of thinking that this was delayed echolalia and scripting, I took this as a good sign. It's not a bad sign, but I took it as he's talking in sentences, and I got overexcited and really was in a deep state of denial for over a year after my husband first mentioned the possibility of Lucas having autism. But, what I know now is kids can have little scripts like that. And we can use those scripts. So like if I knew back then what I know now, I would be like, well, we can assess his articulation, feed ducks, quack, quack. We can program, we can get pictures of ducks. We can teach him to request ducks. We can have that be a part of our matching program and our shoebox program. And like I said, it's not a bad sign if your child is scripting. It just means that we have to look at these scripts or little chunks, or what the Gestalt language processors call gestalts, and look for clues about what's motivating to them, what they like, and teach them more functional language, which is not really the advice that you get from speech pathologists mostly, who recommend really a very, very different approach. So it's based on my experience, also based on my experience as an author and an online course creator with expertise traveling around the world doing international keynote speaking on the verbal behavior approach. So I interviewed Sari Risen, and it was a great interview. And like I said, you can get that on the same page as this video. But after that interview, Sarai was like, I want to learn more about it, and I want to really do an in-depth analysis. And so Sarai, right after the podcast was done, before it was published, she created a 15-page critical appraisal of the natural language acquisition paradigm. It's called Language Interventions Informed by Natural Language Acquisition, a critical appraisal. And like I said, we will link this in the show notes. And I reviewed that before I did this new video. And I also reviewed, that was 2023 that was published. And then in 2024, very recently in the Journal of Autism and Developmental Language Impairments, another critical analysis was done by Hutchins, Knox, and Fletcher. and it's called Natural Language Acquisition and Gestalt Language Processing, a critical analysis of their application to autism and speech language therapy. This is a 20-page document. It's also very good and very in-depth. But I don't want to make this into a real in-depth. I just want to tell you from my perspective, based on that interview, based on my analysis of these 2 critical reviews, the 5 points that I have learned. And whether you're a parent, a speech and language pathologist, a behavior analyst, or any other caregiver or professional, if you want to go deeper, you have all the show notes at podcast number 293. So let's get into the top 5 things I recently learned about Gestalt Language Processing. The first thing I learned is, while I just started hearing the term Gestalt Language Processing in 2022, this GLP learning style was first described in the 1970s and 80s. Some linguists believe that most children learn one word at a time and then combine phrases and eventually sentences. This is called the analytical language learning style. But those that believe in GLP, they believe that there are some children, now mostly children with autism, who communicate in multi-word chunks called gestalts. And they believe these children learn language in a whole different way and need the NLA approach and the 6 stages, which I am going to describe a little bit later. The 2 critical reviews, as well as my 20 plus years as a professional in the field, as well as experience working with my own son and hundreds of autistic children with delayed echolalia, they do not support this idea that there are 2 different learning styles of communication. In fact, even typically developing children use some chunks and scripts when they are learning to talk. They memorize and repeat things like "to infinity and beyond," and sometimes use things both in context and out of context. The second thing I learned from the 2024 critical analysis of NLA and GLP suggests that authors of other papers have reported 50 to 75% of people with autism might be Gestalt language processors. But there is no assessment to accurately determine whether a learner is acquiring language using natural languageation versus the analytic model, which is more common, versus somewhere in between. And after reading the newest critical review, there appears to be no evidence to support that some kids are Gestalt language processors who acquire and learn language differently. The third thing I've learned about Gestalt language processing is some of the natural acquisition framework ideas and strategies used within the 6 stages described by Marge Blanc in 2012 have components that I agree with and I use within the verbal behavior approach and my Barbera method. These include engaging the learner with preferred activities, including physical play. In our online course, one of the activities is to take a language sample, and I often suggest physical play, which often can boost sounds and words and word approximations. Another strategy that we can agree on is to be animated and fun. This is definitely the cornerstone of my approach. And if your child or clients like Miss Rachel, I have 9 free videos to help you and your child or clients, which you can also get for free. We'll link those in the show notes. Another strategy that I believe in that we both can agree on is to make teachable moments with learners who are pain-free, regulated, and happy. My top 3 goals are that learners are always as safe, as independent, and as happy as possible. Also, with my background as both a registered nurse and a behavior analyst, I'm constantly pushing parents and professionals to always rule out medical issues if the child is not happy, and to really focus on happiness. And another thing we can agree on is we need, as professionals and parents, we need to carefully observe a child's fascinations, joys, and favorite things. We use preference assessments, and we always encourage people to look at what the child is playing with, what he or she is scripting, because it obviously is important to that child, and we can use this in our detective work to really build functional language. However, a lot of the premise of Gestalt language processing and that natural language acquisition are not supported in research, and I have some disagreements with. For instance, in stage 1 of Marge Blanc's NLA framework, she suggests avoid modeling single words. This is the opposite of what I recommend in my approach. I have lots of success stories and one published case study at the time of this recording. It's a white paper outlining how a child went from 2 words in 1 hour of a language sample to 180 words and short phrases in a little bit over a month using my protocols within my online course. You can read that white paper at marybarbera.com/white paper, and we'll link that in the show notes as well. Another thing I disagree with is that Blanc recommends in stages 1 and 2 to teach lots of gestalts and to add carrier phrases such as it's a, or let's, go, let's run, and to use a lot of redundancy with these little scripts and carrier phrases. In my opinion, this will almost always lead to more scripting, less functional language, more rote responding, and conditional discrimination errors. Now, when I say conditional discrimination errors, I mean when Lucas was young, for instance. The whole idea was to expand, but his one-word utterances were not strong. They weren't spontaneous, and it was too early to begin combining things and to... So over and over again, I would have him say, open cabinet, so that I would open the cabinet after he said it, and then he would pick a snack, and then I would get him to request or demand for that. But the problem is that it was so much redundancy that he didn't get other areas to practice that skill in. So when I would hold up a bottle of water and he would say open cabinet instead of open bottle, because he didn't have his base, when you're building a house, he didn't have the foundation built. And so over the years working with so many clients and families and professionals, I have found that when you use carrier phrases, when you use scripts, when you try to increase length of utterance, it almost always backfires if you don't build it right. So in stages 1 and 2, I would not be pushing it's a let's go, let's run. I have another example on this. So I had a client named Faith, and Faith was doing pretty well, and we got a lot of nouns. We were teaching her actions and adjectives and colors, and she was doing really well. And Mom then decided she would start private speech therapy to, encourage more language, which is great. But when I went in to see her at her preschool with her therapist, the therapist would hold up a card, and the card would be a cat. And all of a sudden, Faith saying, it's a cat. Hold up a bed. It's a bed. And I'm like, where did it's a come from? So I asked the therapist, I said, where did this carrier phrase? It had been a couple weeks since I had observed. And so she explained that the mom had taken her to private speech therapy and that they probably taught her that. And so I said, well, there's some issues with it. For instance, if you hold up a picture of Mom or a picture of Faith, which we did, I held up a picture of Faith and I said, who's this? And Faith said, it's a Faith. So if you are teaching this way and your child or clients are making these kind of errors, then this is some of the considerations and some of the issues that I have. So I personally believe that teaching kids one word at a time, teaching kids to identify and request the things that they love first, then everyday items second, then move to actions and adjectives, and then very carefully encourage the combination in the most natural way. I avoid carrier phrases and modeling before hundreds of single words are being used spontaneously. I will link 2 blogs in the show notes too, one on carrier phrases and why I don't encourage them. And I also have a blog, an older blog, What's Wrong with Timmy, and the goal of 4-word utterances. I will link both of those in the show notes. I also have a problem with it kind of along the same terms. I also have a problem with increasing length of utterance in stage 3. So in stage 3, the NLA model framework says to focus on modeling 2-word utterances. Again, my behavioral approach to teach language to young children with autism and or speech delays is to stick to those 1-word nouns and then move ahead. I also have a whole video blog podcast on the work. Well, it was an analysis of other people's work by Dr. Vincent Carbone done a few years ago, and I summarized that. And really what I've found over the years, especially through my online course participants, is we teach a lot of 1-word phrases and we try 1-word utterances, and we try hard not to push 2 words, 3 words, and let those combinations come as naturally as possible. And it's worked for many, many children, including the child that is featured in the case study. And the 5th and final thing I've learned that I'm going to talk about today is many participants who join my courses, my online courses, have been told that their children are or clients are Gestalt language processors. And I know that my strategies are based on science and will work for these children who have little to no spoken language and or are communicating mostly with scripting or delayed echolalia. I also know that my proven 4-step child-friendly approach can help with not just expressive language, but receptive language, imitation, social skills, picky eating, sleeping, potty training, grooming, and dressing, all at the same time while reducing problem behaviors at school, in the community, and at home. So I don't want to split hairs here. I do agree that most kids with autism, I don't know what percentage, but could be considered Gestalt language processors, but I don't think they need another whole system, because in my opinion, and based on these 2 critical reviews I reviewed, there isn't evidence to support a different way of learning for these children. I do think that the first step I would recommend, just to get a handle on where kids are, whether they're your child or your client, is to do my free 10-minute digital assessment. It's called the Barbera Early Childhood Assessment, or the BECA for short. And this will really help you get started looking at children's strengths and needs and making a plan. It is still free at the time of this recording, although I said it was going to be free for the first 1,000 people, and now it has been tens of thousands of people have taken this assessment. You can find it at marybarbera.com/assessment. Again, we'll link everything in the show notes as well. So in summary, 2 published critical reviews of Gestalt language processing and the natural language acquisition framework suggest that categorizing kids as Gestalt language processors and or using the 6 stages to teach these kids in a different way are not based on evidence at the time of this recording. But there are several strategies that we can all agree on, such as looking for clues within scripts for motivation and interest, making all therapy fun and using an animated tone, and focusing on happiness. If you're interested in reading the reviews or accessing any of the resources I discussed, check out all the show notes at marybarbera.com/293. And I'll see you right here next time.